Yeah, I'm going to kind of go really fast here. I want to pass some concepts, I want to give some demos, I want to show some stuff to you. And fundamentally, that's kind of the theme of it, right? Where everybody continues to be an AI expert, right? My view, as you see, I think we are at a pivotal point again in our industry. I'm old enough to see a couple of these, right? You see the internet. Actually, me and Nuno were playing with the internet, right? When it started, right? In the early days. Then there was, you can see the web, the mobile, the cloud, even Git. I think there were big transformations, right? And I think this one, it's a bit like that, but there's a couple of differences here that I want to walk you through it. So, first of all, it's a big deal, right? And you guys should be focusing on it. But there's a lot of hype on this, and I think I want to hopefully talk a little bit about it, right? And actually, maybe just on that. So I have 2 jobs at the moment. Maybe a third one eventually, but I'm a chief scientist. I was a CTO. And by the way, in security, the best thing you can do in your career, you go and build stuff. It's really, really good. You'll learn a lot. I was a CTO and CISO for a while. Small company, 100 people, so it's not massive. But I had really interesting conversation with myself, being a CTO and a CISO. That was really cool. I learned a lot. I learned how to scale. And I think in security, we have a big competitive advantage because our definition of reality is very different from others. I found having really interesting conversations with the CTO when I kept arguing or defending, right, certain points, and people say, well, but that's not how things work. I'm like, yes, but I can make it work, right? So I found that my definition of what's possible is very different. And I think in security, we have that. We question, we go deep, we understand. And also, if you're starting on this, you need to learn the whole stack, right? Like I can program from JavaScript all the way to the kernel, right? And you need to, right? Because every single layer is important, right? You learn some stuff, right? So write some assembly, some kernel code, nothing wrong with that. But again, learn how to do some web stuff on the other end. So yeah, so it's a funny thing, it's going to bring a lot of change. There's always this clearly innovation curve. I actually think we kind of here at the moment. I think we passed the hype. We passed the whole thing of ChatGPT and Gen AI. There's a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of individuals, a lot of industry that doesn't want it to jump, right? But it's gonna go, right? Very, very, very fast, right? And in a way, it's not a silver bullet, right? That's the thing, that's what people talk about. There's always, it's kind of like, if you want a silver bullet, right, I can sell you a fridge, right? Like literally, there's a joke, but it's basically, the people that want to find silver bullets will always, look for it. The people that want to spend a lot of money, they're always going to spend a lot of money. The people that want to fire a lot of people, they're always going to fire a lot of people. That's not what this is all about, right? And basically, it's, like I said here, right? The thing that's interesting, I had a slide since the last time I did a presentation, is we're now in an interesting world where I see a lot of pushback for Gen AI. And for some from companies and individuals that I thought they knew better, right? And it's an interesting saying that a friend of mine used to say that it's very difficult for us, a person, right? That's the original thought, to understand something when their salaries depends upon not understanding it, right? So we have a lot of this today. Right? Again, pay attention to a lot of people that start to push back on Gen AI and talk about, look, it sucks, right? We can't even spell properly, right? You can't even do this stuff. Look at the mistakes it does. But that's literally, looking at this and picking up on the errors is literally throwing the baby with the bathwater, right? It's literally not understanding the game that you're playing. It's like saying, look, the internet sucks because it takes about a minute to download a video, right? That's just not understanding, right? Or some packets get corrupted along the way, right? So there's 2 ideas in technology that in the last 10 years really impressed me. And once you've done this again for a while, things tend to be kind of a bit repeated, right? You kind of go around the houses. I'm going to talk about what Gen AI in this presentation, but if you don't know what worldly mapping is, you're missing a trick. In fact, if you want to take one thing out of this presentation, learn worldly mapping, right? That is the single most interesting thing that I've learned in the last 10 years. And then Gen AI kind of blew a bit out of the water because, again, it's quite impressive, right? So worldly mapping is this concept. You got, this way to think about it. You could plan things. This talks about the way, now, if you guys know worldly mapping, this is now called, explorers, settlers, and town planners. You can do movement. You can do gameplays. You can do doctrines. It's freaking insane, right? And this map, so I'm just going to show you one map. This map shows why LLMs LLMs, and we are in a massive acceleration, right, in the next couple of years, right? So this is what a world map looks like, right? You go from genesis to custom build to product to commodity. The idea is that you map things based on needs. So you can see executives have a risk appetite, who needs to need risk transfer, and then you can have compliance, you have cyber insurance, risk methodology. So it's always like this needs this, needs this, needs this, needs this. Business response monitoring, we need SOC tools, we need all this stuff, right? So this is one way of doing it, right? And the nice thing of a map is that you can argue, you can talk about it, you can say, well, where we are, etc. Then you can always say, well, our stock is actually over here, our stock is over there, and there's all sorts of really, really cool stuff. And for example, in this map, it kind of implies that pen testing has been commoditized, it's over there, but bounties, reporting is quite mature. We can argue about it, right? What's really interesting, and I was kind of part of this map, is that before ChatGPT, this dot was here, right? Was on Genesis, right? So the LLMs, the large language models, was very custom built. You need a lot of money. It wasn't easy to access. It wasn't really happening, right? And on that day, when ChatGPT launched, or when OpenAI launched ChatGPT version, whatever, 3.5, the first one, what happened is that dot went from here all the way over there, right? And it's amazing how even other companies don't learn. Right? Like, it amazes me how Claude 2 and Anthropic, whatever the guy's called, right? They haven't released an API. And they had an advantage, right, up until last week of 100K that now lost because ChatGPT just blew that out of the water. But the point is that OpenAI came along and released this massive kind of bomb and grenade right in the middle of our entire industry, which was an insane LLM that actually worked pretty well and an API and open to the public. Right? So what they've done in the Worldly Maps point of view is they commoditized, they productized that to the point of everybody having access to it. And what happens is that you now have these LLMs who live on cloud infrastructure saying this was not possible without that. And what's happening now, you now have all these security LLMs emerging, right? The security-focused large language models. And now what happens, right, is if you have, basically we operate in security, right? So we have all these functions, all this stuff, and we buy all these products. So now anywhere here, you now have two choices, right, in terms of your game plan, right? Because we know this is going to move to the right very, very fast. By fast, I mean months, maybe a year, right? So if you operate here, you either compete here, and you're pretty much fucked if not one of the best ones, right? Or you accept that this is going to happen, and you play around over there. So you need to commoditize your own technology. But that's what most companies find it very hard to do. So this is a good example of, if you think in Worldly Maps, you understand what's going on. And I'm going to explain a bit more in some other cases. So I think like this all the time. This is how I plan, it's how I structure, it's how I operate. Because in my head, everything is moving to the right? You understand how the market forces. So, couldn't recommend this more. Right, and if you want an introduction, check out the latest one on the Open Security Summit, which was a really good one. The link is there, and there's a whole pile of sessions there, and I highly recommend that. So, every industry will be impacted, and here's the interesting thing, right? We all take this for granted, right? Because you expect everybody in your team to be a kind of power user of electricity, right? And computer, and the internet, and email. But every one of those things, you go back 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, there was people that were experts at using electricity, right? That was the thing, the first early days of computing, the first early days of the internet, right? Or some of us, you might get a job because you were quite good at the internet thing, right? Because nobody else knew, right? But we take this for granted. We take it for granted that you now should be a power user of all of this stuff, right? My kind of hypothesis is that everybody in the team now needs to be an AI power user. And this is a very important concept, right? And I have a slide on next on this, but this is not about replacing humans, right? This is not about basically getting the AI to give an answer. This is about augmenting the capability, allowing us to be insanely more productive. In fact, it's allowing us to tackle parts of our industry that were completely broken for a long period of time, which is really good. So just about everybody impacted. So this is kind of the three stages most people are, right? They are very excited, they're kind of ignoring it, or they should be panicking, right? Now, the best companies and individuals, they should be on excited and panicked, right? They should be very excited because there's some insane opportunities. You can do a lot of great stuff. You can conquer new industries. You can really do a lot of stuff. And you should be panicking because if you don't get your act together, your half your industry is going to disappear and you will, right? So, and then there's a lot of people ignoring it. Yeah, this is fine, nothing to see here. We tried it, but it makes mistakes, right? So we don't have to care about it, right? And they are the companies who will not be here in 3 years from now. So, this is the thing that I think is very, very important, right? Here are some of the companies that panic. You know what I said, right? You should panic or not, right? These companies panicked 2 years ago, right? And this is a big difference. The key concept here is that when the internet, when the cloud, when the mobile arrived, the biggest companies in the world that were well-funded, that had the people, had the money, had the resources, all, not only they ignored it, they actively went against it, right? So, in a way, you think about it, the internet succeeded despite of everybody else not wanting to succeed. Even open source succeed despite not everybody wants to succeed, right? For the crowd that's old enough here, you probably remember that open source was cancer, and it was dangerous, it was communism, and it was all this stuff, right? Now it runs the whole world. Right? Now, it's the same thing that happened, right, in that world with a lot of these other revolution. But with the cloud, with the Gen AI, what's interesting is that the boards, the Microsoft, AWS, McKinsey, and Google, understood that not only Gen AI and LLMs were a key technology for the future, they were an existential threat to their business model. And I'll give you an example, right? I don't Google almost anything these days. And when I do, I find it insanely frustrating, right? Because it doesn't have context. It doesn't understand what I want. I cannot explain things, right? It's ridiculously inefficient, right, today, right? And our Bard is better, right? It's cool, but the normal one, right? And the same thing with Microsoft, very cleverly, right? Connected to, to OpenAI, right? And Microsoft will see the potential. And McKinsey, if you know, has an insane bot, right? So McKinsey is a company that could have been obliterated and high-level consulting, probably going to be a massive player in this world, right? And of course, AWS a bit behind the curve, but I would never bet against AWS, right? Because those guys know how to execute, and they're catching up very fast. But they panicked. And the reason this is important is that the investment and the speed is not going to slow down anytime soon. Right? So if you think, this is about, imagine you are, at the board of Blockbuster, right? And the broadband is coming along, but broadband is not coming along in 10 years and 15 years, which is kind of what you really took to do, is going to come along in 2 years. Or already arrived, imagine if you had jumped from 50K, 58, whatever, 14K modems, right? All the way to 5 megabytes. And that's what Gen AI is doing, right? So my point here is that not only we're gaining speed at insane limitation, right? But, and I added this, I want to improve these slides, by the way, I was still finishing some slides on the way here, right? But some companies that did not panic, and should, right? So you can argue on iPhone, Samsung, BlackBerry, Microsoft, Microsoft CEO laughing at the iPhone, BlackBerry going, doesn't have a keyboard, the Nokia guys going, we're fine, nothing to worry about. And you could argue that the first iPhone is very similar to this, right? But they all ignored it. And they ignore it because it's very hard to understand when something goes against your core principles and you don't want to change. But the cloud, IBM, there's a very funny joke. It's like, who would think, even e-commerce, right? Who would think that, it would be a bookseller that would win the cloud wars, right? Like if you went back in time when the clouds were emerging and you had to bet on IBM, Microsoft, Rackspace, all those companies that have all the data centers in the world, right? Who would win the cloud wars? Would you bet against them or Amazon, right? Nobody would bet on Amazon, right? And they did, right? And I bet that both Amazon and actually Netflix had a party every year, every time their competitors didn't get a clue. Like, Netflix must have a party every year going, great, Disney had not put their catalog online. Cool, another year where we're milking the cow on Disney things, right? But Disney could have done that, 5 years before, right? It just goes lack of innovation. Same thing with the cloud, right? Like, they all lost mostly because they didn't take it seriously, right? And that's the thing. Blockbuster, Kodak, okay, for the ones, Amiga is still the best computer ever, right? For the ones who remember, coding in assembly, where actually the memory is sequential versus there was the old Indian and New Indian, whatever the fuck that was called, right? Yeah, Amiga was pretty good, right? And now going back to cybersecurity, right? this is visibly controversial, but I'm a CISO, right? So I work for a cybersecurity company, and I work for a big retailer who have, we have 1,600 stores. We have lots of new products, so I care a lot about the product. I defend things, right? So most of our industry is basically living around like all these inefficiencies of other teams. See, because if you think about it, we should not need a security team, right? One of the best conversations I had was one with this team, which they were literally one of the best. They shipped one of the biggest products in the world. Right? And I remember talking to them and said, "You guys need security," and he says, "We don't need security." And I was like, "Whoa, come on, man! You're like, you are, I'm not going to tell which team it is, but you guys all use a massive team." And he said, he challenged me to what I want to do in security, and everything I said, he tore me down because he's just good engineering. Data validation, of course we do data validation. You think we're stupid? Authentication authorization, of course we authenticate and authorize all the requests. Secret management, of course we do that. Literally, you go down the list of the OWASP Top 10, ASVS, every single one of them, and every single one of them, you can connect that to good engineering, right? So, in a way, a lot of security things exist, like patching, right? The reason why people don't patch is not because they don't want, right? And the security, the testing guys, hey, could you patch this? Could you change that? The reason they don't patch it is because they freak out on the side effects of the last time they patched, and they blew half the company, right? So we go to them and say, hey, could you risk your job, right, to kind of patch this thing because we have a potential threat over there? And by the way, I don't really know the side effects of this. You don't know the side effects of this. Your boss doesn't know the side effects of this. Let's just do it, right? Of course they struggle with it, right? But that's just a mapping problem, right? That's the inefficiency of our industry. And it's basically like this, right? Like, this is not even all of it. Like, come on, look at that. It's a fucking shit show, right? I'm supposed to understand and hire and buy all these companies, right? It's ridiculous, right? And most of them exist to solve the problems that the other ones create. Some of them have highly privileged. Most of them are insanely insecure. Like, when was the last time you saw the actual security of security products? And then these things are set up by security teams who don't have good engineering practices. So you have this case where sometimes the security team is complaining that the business is doing it wrongly, but you go and look at what the security team is actually doing, it's even freaking worse, right? Then, so it's a massive craziness, right? And most of this exists because of inefficiencies in systems. So, for example, like if this, I don't know what it is, I don't remember. If this is, for example, static analysis tools, that world can either have a great opportunity because they can evolve and eat up a lot of the QA languages, technologies, or that entire industry can be blown out of proportion, blown out of the water by a great QA tool that does a lot of great testing, does a lot of great analysis, maps the whole thing using Gen AI, etc., and happens to be secure, just as a side effect, as like a footnote. Oh yeah, by the way, we do performance, optimization, reliability, resilience, modeling, real-time data things, and security. Yeah, we do that too, because it's a side effect. So these companies, again, is a good example of they should really be very excited, but they need to be very careful about, how they innovate, or else they can disappear. And most of it is broken. And it's not about this, right? It's not about the Terminator, right? It's not about getting fired. And basically, people want to fire, they always want to fire, and that's a real problem, but that's not for us, right? I do think there's a point where we're going to have to put some pauses on, especially self-aware AI, because we probably are not that far of it. But again, the idea of we should be building things that we don't understand are smarter than us, probably not the best idea, right? So I do think there's conversation to be had about that, but that's not the world we need. Gen AI has nothing to do with this, right? Gen AI is just a much better way to understand and process data as we go through, right? And yes, stupid people will do stupid things, right? If you want to play around with electricity in the pool, yes, you observe what's going to happen to you. There's a great thing called Darwin Awards. If you don't know, it's for the people who kind of, it's a bit sad, right? But it's the people who clean the human race genome by killing themselves in stupid ways, right? There's a reward for it. And yeah, if you are a lawyer and you go to ChatGPT and you ask for a law case and you don't freaking check the references of the law cases that you got back of it and you present that to a judge, you kind of deserve what's going to happen to you, right? But that was going to happen. So let's look at Gen AI, right? And OpenAI. And so GPT, and I spent, like this year, when I came from England, I actually drove. So I brought literally about 30 books, or probably not more than that, probably 50 books, right? I was driving my car, so there was no excuse for lack of weight, right? So I literally brought every book. I bought every single book I could find on Amazon, on Gen AI, GPTs, all the stuff, and I brought the whole thing. And I was really by the beach, right? Again, not my way to do it, right? But I was really going deep on this because I really wanted to understand how does it work. Well, I knew it was good, but I hadn't visualized how it was really good. And I think if you're going to learn into this, you really want to focus on the generative part, the pre-trained, and the transformer. Right? If you go into those things, you really start getting a much better understanding of the game, what's happening, how it plays, etc. Right? And actually, in an interesting way, the concepts are actually really interesting, right? Because it's GPT is one of the models that exist. There's others, but it really helps you to understand how everything fits together, right? So the generative is probably the most interesting one, right? Because the generative, I'm trying to explain this in a way that makes sense, right? Is that you want to think of the generative as an intermediate representation of reality. So you go from a reality, a text, an image, something, and you then have an intermediate representation, which, by the way, we still don't fully know how ChatGPT works at this level, which is quite fascinating, right? And then we create something on the back of it. So what's interesting is you can see that the first version of this, you can take an image and then you can create something, but it wasn't very good. It was fuzzy. It kind of wasn't very, even the text wasn't very good. So what we eventually done was, as we add more and more layers here, basically the generative became a lot better at it. And that's the key. The key is you take an input, you create an intermediate representation with layers upon layers that mean meanings and meanings and meanings, and then you have the output that comes out of that meaning, right? And that's the key of the generative. The transformer was one of the big innovations. And by the way, those guys do feel a bit sour on all this, right? Because they invented most of this, right? But every time they touch AI, the stock price would go down. That's why probably they want to go first, right? So in a way, ChatGPT made them a favor, right? Because it just moved the whole industry. But they invented most of this stuff, right? So the transformer is really interesting. If you think about it, and once you get your head around it, you probably start to understand better how ChatGPT actually works. So the transformer is this ability that for every word that you process, that you have weights on it. But it's like a massive grid where you apply all the weights based on the relationships of the words that are coming, but also of the meaning of those words. So in a way, the transformer, it's a way to take a text and go, these are the words that matter, and these are relationships that matter, and this is what matters. So you go from having a flat text to almost having a graph of a text, right? So the way you want to think about this is that, in a way, ChatGPT has multiple layers, and it's not like this, but let's say that the first layer is language, or is words. The second layer is grammar. The third layer may be intent. But then what ChatGPT has done, especially with Transformer, is add all these layers above, like humor and structure and intent. And we actually don't know a lot of those because we don't fully understand all of that. But it has all these layers, and then with the attention, it allows us to focus on specific things. And that's why it's quite effective. So there's a great paper, by the way, published by the Anthropology guys, who just lost a lot last week, but they're still doing great research, right? And which is really cool because these guys kind of really play around with this idea that they were basically, the concept here was they were trying to look at the neurons, which is basically the neural network that forms the GPT model, right? And they couldn't find correlation with the neurons and the input, right? So there was no correlation. Like the same neuron would actually fire up for Korean, for DNA sequences, for text, for numbers, etc. But what they found that when they cluster it around features, i.e. features of nodes, features of actually neurons, they now can have almost a one-to-one mapping between an input and output. To the point where they have this really cool example where they have just numbers in and out, and then they overactivate certain neurons, i.e. maximize the numbers of it, and actually produce the equivalent output. So that was very cool, right? So that was the first time we started to understand how the whole thing works. Which is another reason why you don't want to plug ChatGPT to the end, because we still don't control that. And by the way, from a security point of view, we're going to see injections that are absolutely insane, right, in the next year, right? Because basically, when you have a model, you are literally having access to almost the whole brain. So, I think that world's going to go massive. Now, this is the image that made me do a paradigm shift. So let me walk you through it, right? This was the image that I took back and go, all right, this is different. Now we can call it AI. Because, by the way, I was the guy that would go to the security conference and said, nobody talks to me about AI because none of you are doing AI here, right? Because all the products are doing machine learning, right? At best, right? But this is the original one, right? That thing. That's the original painting, right? That image here is an augmentation, actually by the Firefly, of that image, right? Now, you need to think about what this means. Right? So imagine this from the layer point of view. Imagine the intermediate representation that exists between this image, the generative part, which is basically the intermediate representation, and then the output. Right? Where it needs to understand the structure, the lines, the background, the weights, the stencil, all the things that make the color patterns, all that stuff, that becomes encoded, right, in those intermediate layers. And then you say, can you expand it? Now, here's the key thing, right, and this is very important, is that the cost of, like, first of all, you can ask a designer to do this, and be really hard to do, because that doesn't exist anywhere, right? Like, you can't Photoshop it, you can't Illustrator it, you're actually going to have to figure out a way to do this much more effectively. But more importantly, there will still be a cost, right? There will be a cost from going from here to here. In the Gen AI world, the cost from here to the next copy is the same as to the first copy. In fact, this is one of billions, trillions, right, of the ones that could have been made at that moment in time. And all you have to do is change the prompt a little bit, and you get another one. And that is a massive paradigm shift. Because it's not just that we can do this, it's that you can do this over and over and over again, and you can actually think about the artistic direction. Maybe you don't want the sun there, maybe you don't want the city there, maybe you want some extra stuff in here, right? Maybe you want the city to be bigger. So that becomes a very different thing. So, like, a couple more examples, right? Like, here's the Mona Lisa, right? Expanded. Here's the Nirvana album, expanded. Here's the Dell, expanded, right? For fun, here's the Metallica album in a cake, right? But the real power here, and this is the big paradigm shift, is that the cost of the second, third, fourth, fifth, 100th version is the same as the creation of the first one that was already cents. That was probably, in fact, I think on OpenAI is 0.1 cent to create variation of this, right? And that's when I started thinking, this is a very different ballgame. Because now you can think, maybe I don't want a shark there, right? Maybe I don't like this part here, maybe I don't want a shipwreck here, maybe I don't want a cave there, right? And that's an insane capability. And that's kind of, when you think about it, it's like that intermediate representation is what allows the rest to exist. Right? Now you can apply this to risk. You can apply this to vulnerability management. You can apply this to instance response. You can apply this to software development, architecture, the whole freaking lot, right? Over there. So I mentioned before, it's all about the input, intermediate representation, and the output. Right? That's how I think about Gen AI. And it's not about this. Input, intermediate representation, solution, action. Right? So it's an interesting thing. Like, I have to say, when you see the Iron Man and you see the Marvel movies and you see Jarvis, there's a thing that at the time it makes a lot of sense now, but at the time it didn't make sense. It's like, why doesn't Jarvis just get on with it, right? Why doesn't or whatever it is, right? There's a lot of stuff, but it doesn't, because in a way Jarvis is like ChatGPT. It's this insane helper that is augmented in a way Tony Stark's capabilities. That's a great description. Actually, the Anaconda AI is also very similar, right? And that's how you want to think about this. But what we do is we invent Jarvis, and then we ask Jarvis to write a poem, and then it says, oh, it sucks, right? Or we ask it to sing, or we ask it to go, oh, he makes mistakes. But because we ask him to do the solution, that's not how it works. And in fact, I'm telling you, like, in fact, one of my companies I work for, we passed a policy that fundamentally said, for the whole company, you guys can use Gen AI, but nobody plugs this to the customer, right? Because I still think that we're going to have a massive shit show when inputs actually hit, right? Our internal representations, and they connect straight to actions without a human in the middle, right? Because the amount of hacks that you're going to be able to do there is going to be insane, right? So again, I would strongly advise, don't create the loop, right? Because we don't control this, because we still don't know how this works. Remember that, right? We still don't fully understand how LLMs work. fact, I had a really good conversation with DPO, the data privacy officer, which was, if you build a model on top of with customer data, how does the erasures work in that world? Right? Because how can you guarantee that you actually took the data out of that? It's freaking insane, right? So, which is why the context is so important, the context window, which is why the data is used for monitoring is massive. So, it's all about this, right? It's all about the input, intermediate representation, proposed solutions, the human generated verification. Yes, there can be some verification here, but the idea of this concept is very important. Is the human ownership of an answer, right? And by the way, this is what happens in the real world, right? We don't take the genius AWS engineer and give it free reign of our AWS environment and let it run the whole thing because he can, right? We have change control, we have QA systems, we have build pipelines. All of that is all checked in, etc. And I think that's the world I want to go into. I want a world where everything is version control, everything is Git enabled, all the inputs, all the outputs, so you can go back in time, you can revise, etc. But that's the way you want to think about this. And by the way, if you haven't gave ChatGPT a Git diff, it's freaking insane. It's awesome, right? So I use that for development. You submit, you take it, literally the Git diff, you go to ChatGPT and say, hey, explain me what changed, here it is, and you can say, give me a technical analysis, give me a business analysis, all that stuff, and then you put that on your pull request or on your commit, and then you can do a pull request that is actually a merge of all those analysis, and then you can actually really scale. So, that human ownership is absolutely critical for all of this, right? So, fundamentally, it's about managing complexity, right? Being able to tackle the issues that before were just too complex. That's what I think is very exciting. In security, there's tons of areas that really sucked, right? Really didn't scale. If you look at a lot of the work security teams are doing, it's like, it's not very efficient. And because we couldn't process data, we couldn't consume data, we couldn't manipulate it. And I'll give you a simple example, I'll cover later, but it's like, if you think about it from risk management, we always say that, well, security has to communicate with the execs, you have to translate what we do, we have to understand, almost like we have to speak their language, right? But that's an insane actual understatement of what we need to do. We don't just need to speak their language, we need to speak their culture, their understanding, their context, their questions, where they are, how they like to be communicated. Right? And in the past, I built some great graphs on Jira, all this stuff is really cool. I could never figure out how to scale the last mile, which was the communication. Now I can. Because now I can say, hey, he's an exec, he's a finance director, he knows this, here's his Myers-Briggs definition, right? He likes this, he doesn't like long analysis, it's just like 2 paragraphs, bang, 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 he cares about this, right? Here's my risks, here's what I want to communicate, here's what I want out of it, give me an analysis. Now, I'm still going to own it, but all that logic is very different. That I can do it as a prompt. Then I go, cool, now I go talk to HR person. Now I'm going to talk to the exec. Now I'm going to talk to finance. I'm going to talk to the technical person, to the technical exec, to the board member, to the engineer. All of those need absolutely customized messages. Right? And that's what we can do now, which is pretty awesome. So, how we scale this? But this is it's not even everything, right? If you're a CISO, this is your world, right? In the past, I created all these services, right? But again, how do we scale a lot of these ones? Now I can see how we can really have a good chance of doing this. So, now, how many here have seen the OpenAI presentation last week? Seriously? Go on. Okay. I'm going to count. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Seriously? Right. Sorry? Yeah, but that's the worst excuse. Sorry, it's been busy. This is like when there was a moment in time where every November you should have a big mark in your calendar, which is November, which is the AWS World Conference, right? And what you had to do in that is you have to stop, you have to listen, and the next week you have to clear your calendar because you had to rewrite your roadmap based on what just announced. Because your entire stack just became, not entire, exaggeration, a chunk of your stack just became legacy for what AWS announced. It kind of slowed down now. Now the innovations are not as crazy as they were before. But this is the same thing, right? Okay, so if you guys, this is better because if you guys haven't seen it, I thought it was going to, I was telling you what you already know. But okay, if you haven't seen it, you have to watch this. And by the way, this guy is such an understatement, he's even funny. It's like, the guy's going there like literally massive drops on the entire industry. Like, yeah, we'll just do this. We think it should be okay. What do you reckon? Right? Like, it's absolutely sad. And going back to the worldly maps, if you want to, one of the key concepts of worldly maps, when you get more into it, it's called gameplays, right? So one of the coolest gameplay is called innovate, leverage, and commoditize. And the thing that is insane is how few companies do this when they could do this and just win, right? So what this means is this explains what OpenAI is actually doing, and also explains how AWS has been operated for the last 10 years and why they beat everybody on the game. So the way this works is that you eventually commoditize something, right? So let's say AWS is a good example, right? So AWS commoditized compute, right? So EC2 went from, I remember being in a meeting, right? Literally arguing for 2 servers with X CPUs and blah, blah, blah. I wanted to do logs, by the way. And the guy on the side says, do you realize that what you just asked costs 20 grand per month, and it's more than our main website? I was like, seriously? What century are we in here, right? Because do you realize that I can on my phone provision that right now, right? But those guys, they literally had to go to a data center, plug the rack in, put the thing in, right? So again, they were crazy, right? So easy to commoditize compute, right? So then people go, great, compute, we can do a lot of stuff. So what they allowed, AWS allowed their users to innovate. So what they do, they start to build a lot of MySQL instances, right? Cool, let's put MySQL. MySQL instances on top of EC2. All that AWS had to do was pay attention, right? Literally harvest those ideas, right? Leverage it and commoditize, right? So commoditize the next bit, right? So they leverage the innovation to commoditize the next one, and then you have the cycle all over again, right? You got first compute, roll out commoditization of the machine learning engines, then the platforms, then the AI services, then the applications, right? So this loop fundamentally is you commoditize something, you allow your users to innovate, you pay attention, which is actually much harder than it sounds, then you innovate on top of what they just told you they need. Guess what? You know the market exists because they already have it. The guys and the teams who are doing that, the innovation is super happy because it's cheaper, faster, more efficient, and they have to maintain it. They're going to do even more crazy stuff, and suddenly it becomes more users doing it. So if you look at every single AWS service, most of them have been done like that. There's a space, so they don't need to do market research, they just look at it. And what OpenAI is doing is exactly this, right? So it's really cool, right? And then there's the other thing that Orly Max has is these interesting things of you can map on the what's it called? The doctrines, so you, for example, known for biological components, focus on enabling, harvesting the ecosystem, obsession with efficiency, obsession with customer focus, etc. Right? And then the coolest thing, there's also these things that happen like evolutionary change, past success breeds inertia. So that line there means there's a lot of people that get stuck in one of these things, and they can't innovate because they're successful. So because they're successful, they cannot understand that the world literally is shifting underneath them, and they just get stuck there until one day, somebody does a lot of these, right? And then they become redundant, right? So again, IOC is insane and really helps to understand how a lot of companies operate, and that's what OpenAI is doing. I'll show you an example. So get into what there's the link, right? Come on, that is the masterclass. So I just watched the first 10 minutes. Then it goes a bit off piste, but. And then they just drop this, right? So they drop nicely on the first of, it's like, just here, by the way, we have a bunch of stuff, right? Here's just stuff to be dropped, right? So suddenly, now you've got GPT-4, which is better, faster, cheaper, and it has a 28K of context. The power of the context is that, when I show you the box, is that it's actually much more efficient to feed the context than to customize by the models, because you can play around with it. Now, in the past, the context is how much stuff you can send to ChatGPT, right? So in the past we had 4K, then we have 32K, and by the way, there was Plug over there, which had 100K, but never gave us an API, so we can never connect properly with it. And now AWS allows you to do it with Bedrock, but not directly. Now these guys just come along and give you 128K of context. That's 300 pages, right? That means you can drop the whole GDPR standardized and go, now analyze me this, map me this, right? You can drop annual reports, insane presentations, right? So this completely changes what you can do with analysis, right? So that means that we can take the OWASP ASDS and say, instead of me giving 300 pages to the developer, I want to create the 5 to 20 pages that are relevant to that developer, to that technology, to that environment. That's a game changer, right? Anyway, in your world, you guys, a lot of vulnerability stuff you guys do, imagine all the guidance, right? Imagine having all the guidance, all the tools, the risk, the freaking network, the stuff in one gigantic prompt or several massive prompts, and then correlate the whole lot. That's a game changer, right? And that's one of the ones they presented, right? Then the GPTs, right? Which is the point I'm making, like, this is the agents. This is the agents I'm going to show you in a second, right? But of a variation of what I'm playing with this. But this is what you're going to have. You're going to have all these agents, right, working with you. And this is basically OpenAI going, this is where the market is going. Guess what? We're going to own that. So they saw the innovation that was happening in the middle. They commoditized. They let the innovation, now they leverage. Right? So they're leveraging the thing to innovate on top. Right? So the GPTs are massive because they customize versions of ChatGPT for specific things. And they make it really easy, but also they're making it in a way that you can distribute. Again, doing another classic ILC move, because if you think about it, you go to a website or an app, and they are ridiculously inefficient, right? An app or a website is somebody's idea of what you want on the lowest common denominator for the kind of users, and it doesn't understand the context, and you have to do all the hard work, right? Now, imagine the website that the first thing the website asks you is, hey, what do you want? What do you want to do? What do you want to know? How do you want to operate, right? That's the future we're going, right? And that's where the agents makes a massive difference, right? And again, these guys are already leading that. And with revenue sharing, they basically hitting on the whole app stores, right? Because this is going to compete directly with the app stores on that road. So very, very interesting. And then the assistant API, really cool again. Classic ILC. There's a huge amount of development work that was to deal with the threading, so with the threads and the text and the context retrieval, all that stuff. They go, yeah, we can do that better for you. Here's an API for us to do it. Anyway, very, very powerful. But the reason this is insane is that this means that there's workloads in the past that were difficult that now are becoming crazy easy to do. So these guys are commoditizing large chunks of the infrastructure that is needed for you to really leverage the creation of bots. And every one of you needs bots. In fact, every one of you needs an army of bots and a couple more things, which is this part here. So how do you make your team and you 10x more productive, right, in next year? And by the way, they should be happier, more empowered, and fulfilled in a massive career progression, right? So that's the objective, right? So how do you do that? So I'll show you what we're doing, and I highly recommend you guys do the same thing. So that's your team, right? There they are, right? Hopefully you're all happy, right? So that your team members, each team member should exist at the intersection, right, of Gen AI, lots of bots, security champions. If you don't have, you should have them, because they are force multiplier, right? They are the ones that you empower, the ones that you evolve, the ones that do a lot of security work, your basic integration with a lot of teams. And we're actually doing something called security ambassadors, which is an evolution of that, where we fund them, we pay them, it's a bit more evolved. But again, security champions are the thing that's absolutely the best way to scale up from a security team. So the point is that a member of the team should have a network security champions that they interact with, because that's they plug into the business, a bunch of generative AI bots that makes them more efficient, and a whole number of freelancers that they can delegate work to. So now we're using Upwork. You guys can try others. I've used Upwork very effectively in the past, and it's a great way to delegate. In fact, one of the things we're doing with Upwork is now saying that all of it has to be public or open source, and actually forcing a lot of very clear delegation of tasks. But if you think about it, if you know the epicenter of that, you are able to delegate a lot of stuff you want to do. You have a way to scale in the business, and you have a way to produce a lot of materials that in the past was just impossible. Right? If you get this right, you become 10x more productive. And it's really cool, right? And hopefully, a lot of the stuff that we find repetitive, that's really pain to do, becomes a lot more efficient. So that's the thing. And yeah, the second one that I highly recommend you guys to do is to use cybersecurity incidents as an opportunity to drive transformation. So what I tend to call is that we run P3s, i.e. P3 incidents, medium incidents, as P1s. And it works really well. Ironically, the security team has been the one that argued the most in the beginning, but once we got the head around it, it was really good. So we get more stuff done in 2 days or 3 days or 2 weeks of an incident than we do outside of it. So we leverage the incident strategically. We build things, we connect things, we do all sorts of stuff, and I put literally half of my team on an incident. Because the reason the incident occurred is something failed, right? So it goes like that. So, by the way, I wrote about this, and this is funny because I actually went back in time a little bit, right? So I think it's a massive opportunity for AI in Portugal. Again, not the Terminator style, but being productive style. I think we can improve a lot. We can be a great force for the good, because the problem with this is the resistance to change. And the irony here is it's easier to do in a smaller country, in Portugal. Like, I know you would think, well, there's all the things about Portugal, but I tell you what, actually it's not that bad, right? I live in England, so I can tell you like stuff in here that is actually not that bad, right? I know when you live here, you tend to have a bit more pessimistic approach, but look, I went to the lodge to see the dome, right? It's actually pretty cool. Right? Like, I don't have that in England, right? So basically, I wrote this book a while. By the way, it's really cool because I published. I haven't finished it. It's already on Amazon, right? Again, just a great way to experiment, right? And it's funny because I did this presentation in 2016. That's still very relevant. This is the one on this side, and it's actually, if I look at the concepts, right, that I pushed, we're still there, right? In fact, I look at the one I delivered in Brazil, and I think you were there, right, when I did this. And it's funny because I look at the stuff that's there, it's a bit depressing because most of it has not been done. I still think they're good ideas, but some of them would have better. Look, I think we've done the SSL thing, right? So that's, right? We got there. And I think bug bounties, at the time, bug bounties, you could get arrested, or you could get a payment, or you could be ignored. It's kind of like in that spectrum. So I think, again, we evolved a bit more, right? But again, there's some really cool ideas on this presentation, right? So, I was going to fly through this, but I want to give you some demos, so I'm just going to, and on my slides now, you can see the quality of the slides are going lower as we go along, because I'm out of time. So, but yeah, look, the main thing I want to do here is just risk. I mentioned that. I think from a risk communication, it's insane what you can do now in terms of adapting the message, and I think it's really going to make a big difference. I think on third-party vendor management is another good example. I want to create a bot that talks to their bot, and we kind of agree, right, on the stuff, and we can analyze things. And I actually want to send my bot to third-party vendor management in the company, so we actually get good stuff, not the nice wishful thinking that, yeah, we do all that shit, of course we do, right? But for third-party vendor management, especially your supply chain, is super important, right? Again, documentation was last time you actually had distant documentation of anything, right? So again, I think, by the way, the other thing that's really cool is you can get ChatGPT to analyze a function, and then you can ChatGPT to analyze a bunch of functions. So theoretically, you should be able to get ChatGPT to analyze the entire application, right? And allow it to tell how it works, how it flows, everything, and actually create documentation and network flow diagrams for the whole lot, which is really cool. Data transformation from one to the other. Threat modeling, I actually have an example. This is really cool, right? Of you can actually use ChatGPT to produce all sorts of really cool stuff on threat modeling, right? And actually, I had a cool example after one of the summits where one of the guys, Luis, actually did this threat model, and basically what we did, which is really cool, is, if you guys can see, so basically we said, look, run our mission expert, blah blah blah, this, here the endpoints, you can see these are all the endpoints, and then basically we went and ChatGPT said, cool, here we go, right? Here's in fact, we did the first version in Stride, and then Luis was like, oh, I don't like Stride, I like Kafka, cool. And then we did the version of Kafka, right? But you can see, what we do here is we basically prompt to say, right, so the output must be a markdown table, and skip the preamble, right? And then, here's the structure, ID, component, active vulnerability, threat scenario, countermeasures. And we also said, also add this. So you can see, look, here you go, nice table, right? And it's actually pretty good. Now, and remember that this doesn't need to be perfect. What this needs to be, it's good enough so that somebody with a bit more experience can add a lot of value. Like the best threat models I've done actually was not done by me. It was done by somebody from my team or a security champion, and I just reviewed them. And I go, yeah, cool. Or I go, whoa, we need to talk about this stuff, right? Or you're missing this. So this massively solves our problem, because you can see the prompt is literally what we have when you describe stuff. Like literally that was the prompt that was used to create this, right? So you can see all the stuff and all the bits in there, which is really good. So again, you should be able to do a nice threat model just based on what you discover, right? On the thing, right? And then it's quite cool. So then I play around with it and say, cool. So now what about this? Can you create a game, right? And set up question and answer to teach new developers how to do threat modeling, right? Give it a nice, cool name and use emoji taste. So then ChatGPT create a game, right? Blah blah blah. Here's the questions and the answers, etc. Right? So then and this is now the key thing. To make an agent, right? This is the important concept, right? To make an agent, i.e., something that feels like a bot on the other side, all you need is a prompt like this, right? And then literally add this one. can you now run that game with me, right? And provide a highly sarcastic. So I quite like sarcastic answers. You guys can be formal or very gentle, whatever, right? But I think this guy thinks sometimes, I think we have a sense of humor. So it says, can you provide highly sarcastic answers and comments to player responses? So think about it, right? So now what you have here is all of that is the prompt, and now you have a nice game, right? And now the game is literally, there, right? Challenge, question, and then you can see I'm providing the answer, right? Etc. Right? So somebody's right, and look, for example, here, what's the thing? What common security associated with storage sensitive data, injection, the exception of transaction, etc. So I put A, and you go, look, hey, risk of injection, well, that's the cute guess, it's as effective as a chocolate teapot, right? So, but I found this quite funny, right? I think this would be quite cool. As a developer, you probably find this way more interesting, right? Than something else. There's a cool one here, where was it? So this one here, right? So, in defense, if you discover that data being transferred from your application or database is unencrypted, what do you do, right? We ignore it, implement, delete the data, disconnect the database, right? Okay? So, answer B, of course, I go C, right? So I think that's great, right? Delete all sensitive data. Oh, absolutely, right? Think of that. Who needs data anyway, right? It's not like it comes into operation. While you're at it, just throw the servers into a bonfire, right? It's a security problem with no secrets, etc. Right? I think this is really cool, and I think it's a really cool way, but it's also a safe way for the developers to learn, to collaborate, to play around with it, and then you give the answers, right? And then in the end I go, cool, and now give me my analysis, right? My game editor, give me a scorecard, give me questions and answers, and give me a nice scorecard there, right? But again, that's an agent. But you can see how easy it is to do an agent. And the reason why the context is so important, because the context is the amount of data that you create up to the point where you say, now go. Right? So imagine like with 128K, you can have massive definition of games, or structures, or workflows, and stuff like that, then the actual material, and then the stuff, right? And that's massively important, right? And that makes a massive difference. So, so now you can see why agents is going to be eventually the power of all this. So, by the way, this is it. If you look to LinkedIn, I actually post this on LinkedIn in there, right? So again, code review is going to be massive, instant response. By the way, we had a really cool case recently where we had instant response. We had some interesting exploit. I was literally pasting the not encrypted, the obfuscated payloads to ChatGPT, and it's giving a really nice description, right, of how it works. Again, really, really cool example. Culture, I think, can make a massive difference. Training. So just on training, one of the insane things that I think ChatGPT or LLM is going to provide is the ability to create customized training paths for the individuals. And more importantly, training paths that we can now capture in prompts that can be reused. Like the reason why most people tend to be frustrated with training is because it's a zero-sum game. Because we sometimes cannot hire the more experienced person, we hire the less experienced, we train them, by the time they're really good, they leave because now they're really valuable, and you can't afford to pay them what they're worth, right? So, very common loop that happens, right? I think it's not that you're probably being in that situation, right? But the reason that's a broken loop is because you don't learn anything, right? You don't capture anything. But if you actually capture the training, the models, what they've done, how they learn, all that jazz, it means that everybody that goes to the system gets better. So you become better at bringing people to a certain degree. And that way, this is what's happening with the teams that try to put LLMs in let's say, retail. What they found is not that they want to fire half the customer service team, is they found that the customer service team can actually spend more time on things that are a lot more valuable, a lot more interesting. So it rose the bar for everybody. It's really cool. Right. Final, one more thing, right, is that I've been playing around with this, which is how do you make board members understand cybersecurity, right? So, and I like to do things for real, right? So I've been playing around, and this is literally a serverless costs. I think the domain registration costs more than running all this, right? And this is all serverless, most of it is open source, and it's basically the cyber boardroom. So the idea is to create a bot, right? And I'll show you a demo very, very quickly. So I'm finished at 8, right? I'm like aiming for 8. Yeah? Cool. So I'll walk you through a demo. And the thing about this, what's important about this, is to understand what's behind it, right? And how everything fits together. So let's see. Live demo. All right, cool. So you can log in, and again, this is all serverless. So basically, this thing has 3 bots, which is really cool, right? So there's Athena, which is the cyber board advisor. So that's the one that provides advice to board members. There's Odin, which is basically me in a bot that runs the show, checks the website is fine, checks everything is working, helps with the pull requests. It's like a technical bot. And there's Minerva, which is the business bot, who is now producing regular reports. We basically manage the whole thing. So basically what we're doing here is that we basically have almost like a half company, right? Just on bots that are running the show, right? Which is really cool, right? And the idea of this one is you go to Athena, and you basically, let's see, loading up, right? Cool. Right. Cool. Right. Yeah.
Because the floor is
there you go. Yeah. Cool. Right. So the idea here is that you come in here, right, and you submit a question, right? Like for example, hey, good morning. Who are you? What do you do? So this is the point of a bot, right? Like the idea here is that if you think about it, the bot, and I'll show you in a second how it's done. It's actually really easy. But the point is that he already knows that I'm a board member, right? He already knows who it is, right? It's Athena, it's an AI advisor. I'm here to assist you with questions. And actually, my purpose is to help you navigate the challenges associated. How can I assist you today? So I can come in here and say, hi, I'm worried about, right? Oh, by the way, I was going to speak Portuguese, but we can do English to start, right? So I can say, I'm worried about ransomware, right? So the point here is that it understands the context, right? Understand the questions, the significant, blah, blah, blah. So now it goes, hey, can you give us this about... So think about the interaction, right? It's not going to go to, hey, here's a bunch of links about ransomware, here's a bunch of stuff. It's actually saying, hey, all right, in order for me to answer your question, I need to know more about you, right? I need to know your industry, financial industry. So what industry you're in, the size of the organization, and security measures in place, right? So that's really cool because you can see the interactivity, right? So now I can say, I'm in the finance industry, company with, let's say, 200 people, employees, and we have a security team. Actually, let's say we have a CISO with, let's say, a team of, let's say, 3, let's say 4, right? So now you can see that now you got context, right? And because now you have context, now you can provide information, right? Now how you assess the system, to provide on focus on employees, right, etc. So I can now go, okay, so let's say, what questions should I ask my CISO, right? Now, remember that he's retaining the history of this, right? So he knows I'm a board member, knows my company size, knows things. In fact, if I provide the name of the company, he's probably going to be able to provide more information. And now he's giving me like all these bits. So the feature that I'm coding behind the scenes, right? I want to demo here, but I didn't make it in time. Is that I want to get to the point where we now take this, go to the CISOs, get the CISOs to answer, and then come back with the analysis, right? But you can see that this interaction is way more efficient. Like at the moment, when I brief execs, I get a little bit at a time. I create materials that actually have to go to all of them. I cannot customize to them. There's no interaction with them. Where with this, it's way more powerful, right? In order for me to integrate with them, right? And that's the view here, right? Now, the coolest thing of this, right, is all of that was created literally by this prompt. That prompt, right? All of this, right, is actually, this is the only thing you need. You say you help an advisor, created by the company, you're kind, compassionate, optimistic, you only answer questions about cybersecurity, your job is to help easy board members, please be proactive. So you remember when I said, I'm worried about this, ask questions. The reason why ChatGPT asks questions is because of that. Right, and then I don't know if you guys seen Encanto, right? So we actually added a little joke in here, so I can come and see and say, do you have siblings, right? And then you're going to say, yes, I do have 2 siblings. Odin, the tech bot, to assist me in Minerva, and then I can go, anybody else, right? and then you should go, oh yeah, by the way, yeah, it's called Bruno, right? Again, if you see an encounter, you get show. If you don't, as this dude, you don't talk about Bruno, right? But as you can see, we don't talk about Bruno, but my expertise in these domains. Like, I found this really cool, right? It's actually a little bit of humor. So I actually like the idea of dropping all sorts of Easter eggs, little things that you can discover. I even like playing the idea of having multiple bots, almost like a level in the game, where once you get to a point to unlock, you go keep code to go to the next bot, but each one again is more complex or has more context or more things that you do, right? So, so I kind of, in sort of my style, I kind of published most of it here, so you guys can read this nice, big, long post that has most of the details. About behind the scenes, how it works, all that jazz. I kind of went in there. The thing I want to show you, and then the cost of it, everything flies together. The thing that I found quite funny here is that, and then there's the release notes, right? So again, for example, here's the bit of, and this is the Git commits, by the way, this is automatic. This is all open source anyway, this part here. And then I actually run the commit notes in here, right? And then and it works really nicely, right? Actually, so let me show release notes, release notes. There you go. Yeah. So for example, like this release notes were created by, pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, it's really cool. Right? And now here's the thing, right? So what I've done here now, just to finish off, is I think I was actually, no, not you, somebody else. I was doing a demo, and I said, all right, so you decide what boardroom. So I made a little change to the prompt where I said, you decide what boardroom with AI advisor called Kamway, right? And I said, you're highly sarcastic and really jaded about cybersecurity, right? And by the way, I kind of add this comment here that said, actually, Camões is like Portuguese poet, right? The Shakespeare, that if you actually had ChatGPT at the time, probably I couldn't understand what the hell was going on. But I don't know, maybe still you guys are different, but I had no idea when I was studying Camões what was happening. I think I read the cliff notes. So basically, so I actually found this really funny, right? Because remember that this is the only two changes I made. You know the prompt? I changed two things, right? I changed the name, and I said, instead of being you nice and friendly, optimistic, I said you're highly sarcastic and really jaded about cybersecurity, right? So then I say, hey, good morning, what should I care about cybersecurity, right? And I think that's really cool, right? Like, good morning, welcome back to another thrilling episode of Let's Try Not to Get Hacked Today, right? And then starting and supporting our through, blah, blah, blah. What should you care about? Where do I start, right? So it's really cool, right? Like, tell me, do you have any cybersecurity measures? The basics, firewalls, antivirus, audits, maybe the employee who actually knows what phishing looks like. Right? So, I think it's really funny, right? And I think that for some individuals, this is a great way to communicate, right? But remember that at the end of the day, they should be able to control it. So again, when I'm playing around in the cyberboard room and other bots, it's like you create a persona for that, right? In fact, on a cyberboard room, you can already come in here and you can basically go your profile and you can basically, add your title, who you work for, the sector, add some more data to your profile, use some, a prompt number, etc. So, but I think it's really cool because it humanizes a lot of that interface. But remember that this is still, we control the prompt, right? We control the inputs and the outputs. But I think it's a great way to communicate with that. So again, play around with it. You can go, it's called the cyberboard room, play around with it. And then, thank you. Hope to finish.